Welcome back to the book club. Today I'll be reviewing the book The Sunlit Man by Brandon Sanderson. This is secret project number 4. So this is the last of his quarterly Year of Sanderson books that he did a Kickstarter for last year. Basically, he wrote, if you're not aware, 4 secret books over the course of the pandemic. I believe in 2021 he wrote them, and he sort of released them each quarter over the course of this year. This is finally the last one, and this is a Cosmere Tide novel called The Sunlit Man about a guy named Nomad. So this is going to be a spoiler-free review. I'm going to keep things super high level. I'll talk about the plot overall and just like a little, there's some things that you learn in the first chapter that aren't really spoilers. So I'll be, talking about the situation that Nomad finds himself in. But overall, I'll be talking about the plot, the characters, and the pacing of the book. I normally also do a section on Will I Keep Reading, but this is just a standalone novel. So I will keep reading Sanderson. That's a spoiler alert. I've read most of his books at this point, so I'll be skipping that section for this video. So let's just dive right into it. For the plot, I rate the plot a 9. And overall, this is a story about a guy, Nomad, who finds himself stranded on a planet, and he's being chased by some bad guys called like the Night Watch, I think, and he needs to figure out how to get off this planet so he can keep on running because they will find him eventually. So Brandon himself has mentioned who Nomad is in like blog posts before this book has come out, when he like released a preview of the first couple chapters. It is also directly revealed who Nomad is later on in this book, but I don't want to spoil it directly, just because if you're trying to stay completely spoiler free, it is a fun surprise trying to piece together who it is. I think that it's pretty obvious pretty early on if you've read, Sanderson's other books who Nomad is, but it is a fun little surprise. I think the interesting thing about the plot in this book is that it's a more direct conversation about how investiture and all the various like Cosmere functions that Brandon has written about works and like how it's used. So in a lot of his previous books, he's sort of gotten more and more into, especially with like Mistborn Era 2, he goes more and more into like how the actual magic systems across all of his books work. Like there's things called investiture that exist across all these magic systems. There's things like connection and intent and all this stuff. And there's like sources of investiture that are different on every planet, and the way it's transferred can be different, but there's some like core intrinsic properties that are the same. And because this book takes place like in this sort of space age of the Cosmere, it's unclear exactly how far into the future it is. There is, the characters have a lot of knowledge about investiture and how it works. So I think that this is a fun, for big Sanderson fans, this is a fun peek into like how some of the sausage is made when you have this like, book where a character knows a lot about investiture and is like tracking the percent of, there's like some unit that they give based on the book Warbreaker, like breath equivalent units is like a new invention that I think is maybe the first time it's mentioned, but they have these ways of measuring investiture based on the amount of breaths it is equivalent to, which again, like comes up pretty early, not really a spoiler at all. But it's fun to like see this evolution of the magic system where you're sort of like seeing things across the spectrum. It's not just like one planet, one magic system, but rather you have a character that understands the magic of a lot of different systems. My main critiques for the plot, though, because I did give it a 9, is that I do think that the overall plot is fairly predictable, although like in classic Sanderson fashion, there's multiple, plot threads at play. They come together and you get a very climactic and, fun and interesting Sanderlanche moment where, characters beat the odds and do things unpredictable, and like, new powers are founded, or, whatever, people surprise you. There's a bunch of those that happen in the Stormlight Archive and Mistborn. So you kind of know what to expect with these books, but not in a bad way, in a good way, because you know that it's building up to something really cool and really fun. And there's always going to be some twist in there as well. Like exactly how you think the world works isn't how it works. And there's actually some new piece of information you learn, or new pieces of information you learn. And then all of a sudden, like you look at things in a new light, and, characters can do some awesome things. So that's at play here. The other minor critique I have is that I don't know how well this book will play for somebody who hasn't read a lot of Brandon's other books. So if you're a big Brandon Sanderson fan, you've read, a bunch of the Mistborn books, the Stormlight Archive, you've read his standalone books like Warbreaker and that kind of thing, and Elantris and blah blah blah. I think this book is awesome, and you learn a lot about, uh, you learn some more details about like those various magic systems and how they all come into play with characters that know about all the other systems. They know about the planets and space travel and all of this stuff. But if this is your first Brandon Sanderson book, you can, I think, still appreciate the plot, but I don't know if you can really appreciate all of the various sci-fi things that kind of happen. It may just seem like really weird sci-fi that's not like grounded in our science, but is like some new science system. Because like, in Brandon's Cosmere, there's like he has his own thing. Instead of an atom, there's an axum or something, and there's some like physics differences and all this stuff. So there's parts of this that kind of read like a sci-fi book, though also if you've read a bunch of his other books, you kind of understand how this play into the magic system. So it doesn't really feel like sci-fi. But I do think that for somebody who isn't well versed in the Sanderson lore, they may read this and feel like it's a sci-fi book. So I guess, if you have read this book and you haven't read much of other Sanderson books, I'm very interested to hear what you think about it. Or if you guys know other YouTubers or whatever who have reviewed it, who haven't read Brandon's other books, I'm very interested to know like what their thoughts are overall, because it's hard for me to put myself in the shoes of somebody who knows nothing about the rest of the Cosmere. I've read like every other Cosmere book that is out there, so I kind of have seen all the other magic systems and know these other, characters and all this stuff that get referenced. So I'm very curious how that plays out for somebody who's just not very well versed in that. This is definitely a treat to people who have been like super invested in Brandon's books over the years. Now, onto characters. I rate the characters a 10. I think overall this is a book about Nomad and his journey, but Brandon doesn't disappoint with the cast of supporting characters that Nomad meets on this planet and become part of his travels. Nomad having a lot of Cosmere magic system knowledge gives him a unique perspective to like meet these other characters, because he gets to like, tell them some things about the magic system, their own magic system that they don't really understand. Like they just take for granted a bunch of things that are happening, and he's actually able to explain why. And when he does explain why, they don't really understand why. But that leads to this interesting character dynamic where it's just like, this guy has a wealth of knowledge. He's basically like an alien comes to your planet and tells you all about the hidden things about quantum physics that we don't know about. And we're just like, I don't really know if that's true. But you become friends with the alien anyways, and you have a good fun adventure. So I think that there's a lot of that at play. I can't speak that much about specifically what happens with Nomad and like why I think that's such a good characterization. That's like really why I'm rating this section a 10, is because like the things you learn about Nomad are really interesting, and they're going to play into some of Brandon's other books. And I don't want to talk about it because it'll spoil things if you haven't already read the book. But if you're a fan of Brandon Sanderson, trust me, like there's a lot of fun, juicy information, a lot of juicy speculation that can come out of this book. And I'm very much looking forward to Brandon's future stuff, where we get to see things that happened before this time and can understand how Nomad got to where he was. It's just a lot of fun characterization fodder. And also, honestly, this book kind of made me want to go back and reread some of the other series again with this knowledge that I have now, just to see like where these seeds have been planted along the way, because they definitely have been, and I definitely missed them. Like, for example, I read the Stormlight Archive first. That was the first Brandon Sanderson series I read. And then I went back and read Mistborn, and I read Elantris and that kind of thing. And there are some things that Wit does in Stormlight Archive that are actually part of, I think at one point he uses like some breath magic stuff from Warbreaker. And I like didn't pick up on that at the time because I'd never read Warbreaker. I just like thought, oh, maybe that's an interesting part of this world's magic system we haven't seen yet. I think there's some stuff with allomancy in the Stormlight Archive that like maybe Wit does at some points. So like all those allusions to other magic systems, I totally missed the first time I read it. And with the context of this book, there's probably other things that I've missed over the course of my Sanderson journey. So one day I'll probably get back to rereading those books with this new information in mind, because I think there will be some fun hidden treats. Um, the last category here is pacing, which I am also giving a 10. I read the little blurb that Brandon wrote after the end of this book, and it very much matched my feeling of the book. He was talking about how he wanted to like how he was experimenting with different tropes and that kind of thing, and he also like was experimenting with a writing a very fast paced action focused book. And that is exactly what this was. This book is basically wall to wall action. There's no rest. Like, it's just constant things happening one after the other. And the excitement stays high the whole time. Honestly, it kind of feels like reading a book the way that Will White tends to write, at least in his his Cradle series and his most recent The Lost Horizon or The Last Horizon. I forget which one it is. But like some of Will White's books are like, Will White talks about writing with like all action and no fat, and it's just like wall to wall stuff. And that's what this book is. There's like very little time for characters to have a conversation when they're not just like in a battle or running away from something or whatever. So I think for that reason, the pacing is a 10. It's hard to stop reading because each end of a chapter is like a mini cliffhanger into the next thing that's happening. There's almost no breaks. Which is very unlike some of, actually most of Brandon's other books. In the Stormlight Archive and Mistborn and all this stuff, there is a sort of ebb and flow of action and planning and that kind of thing. And this book is just wall to wall action. So if you like books that are like that, I think this will probably resonate with you. I think in general, if you're a Brandon Sanderson Brandon Sanderson fan, this book is great for you as well. I will say, like, overall, would I recommend this book to somebody who hasn't read most of Brandon's other books? The answer is no. I would recommend his other series first, but I do think that this is a great payoff for somebody who has been invested in the Cosmere universe and has read a lot of those other books. So it's very hard to rate this book like on its own without the context of the rest of the Cosmere. I think that it would rate a lot lower if I had to, but for me personally, because I just have all of that Cosmere knowledge in my brain, this book is near perfect 9 10 10 rating. And yeah, that's all there is to say, really. If you guys have any thoughts about this book in the comments below, let me know. I would love to know, again, if anybody has like reviewed this book and hasn't actually read a lot of other Sanderson books. I'm very interested what the opinions are there, just because that's sort of a unique space that I haven't really thought of. It's hard for me to wrap my mind around what this book is like if you don't have the knowledge of all these other magic systems and all the other stuff we've learned about shards and all this stuff from the rest of the Cosmere books. So I would love to hear about that. And I'd love to hear about overall anyone else's thoughts on this book, especially if you didn't like it. I'd love to know, what you didn't like about it. Anyways, that's it for this one. I'll see you next time.